Thanks for taking the time to understand the new features and changes of Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015. My name is Josh Wells, and during this training, we will cover the enhancements to business process flows. Business process flows were first introduced in Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2013 as a new feature. With the release of Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015, this feature has been enhanced further to allow more complex and rich business processes. Business process flows define a set of steps for Microsoft Dynamics CRM users to follow, which leads them to a desired outcome. These steps provide a visual indicator that shows users where they are in a predefined process. For instance, a salesperson could be guided through the sales process using business process flows. For more information in regards to business process flows, review business process flows within the Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015 implementation guide. In Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2013, the experience for business process flow was unique to only business process flows. The UI gave a graphical view of what the process may look like, but it required additional navigation to build the entire process. The experience in Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015 has changed a bit. The UI now follows the same as business process rules, giving you, as a system customizer, the ability to create a business process flow in a single edit experience. The stage and step configuration, branching rules, and the selection for entity relationships are all done on the same business process edit window. Again, let's compare and contrast the differences between Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2013 and Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015. In CRM 2013, business process flows were very linear. A user waited until each stage was completed, and then they were able to move on to the next stage. This flow chart shows what the functionality looked like in CRM 2013. With CRM 2015, it is now possible to have business process flows change the next stage or future stages with user input from the current stage. This allows business process flows to be more relevant based on the details a user has inputted. These changes are done in real time, so it allows a user instant feedback on the data they have entered within the business process. This is done by rule branching and merging. To branch a business process, you can now use if, else conditions for business rules logic that was enhanced with CRM 2015. When creating a branch, you can simply use a single entity or cross it with multiple entities. Additionally, branches will come to a single merge step, which is the step after the else condition. Previously in CRM 2013, you could only loop back to the primary entity once. This limited the flexibility for a process to work with other entities and then loop back to the primary entity multiple times. As shown here, the business process flow is able to go from the case entity into the phone call entity and then back into the case entity, and then the business process flow was done. Within CRM 2015, a business process can now go into and out of the entity loop as many times as it is necessary. As shown in this illustration, the business process flow starts with the case entity, branches into a stage with the case entity, then goes into a phone call, back out to the case, and then continues on deeper into various other branches with other entities, looping back to the case entity. Finally, you can now choose any entity to be part of a business process. There's one limitation here. The entity must be enabled for business process flows. Not all out-of-the-box entities have this option enabled. However, all custom entities can. Unlike CRM 2013, there is no longer a limitation for business process flow steps to only be able to use the entities that contain a one-to-many relationship with the associated entity. Nor do you even need to define a relationship when defining other entities within a stage. It is highly recommended to utilize a relationship, as this allows data to flow between records easily and programmatically through field mappings defined on the relationship. Additionally, you have the ability to choose which relationship to use rather than the predefined relationships in CRM 2013. As shown in these images, one can see that the CRM 2013 on the left has a predefined set of entities and relationships that may be used. However, CRM 2015, as seen on the right, show that there are 3 different relationships that can be used. Also, after branching, the merge stage will allow the selection of previous stage relationships as shown here. These different branched stages could contain a unique relationship with different field mappings. This is important as it allows you to dictate a relationship based on the branches that merged, ensuring the proper data is mapped over. Now that we have seen and discussed some of these changes, let's take a look at it in Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015. In order to effectively understand the power of business process flows, we need to have a scenario and then build a business process flow for that scenario. In our case, the scenario is around case management for our support representatives. The support managers had defined a process, and the best way to really build this process is to see it visually first. I have done so by using Microsoft Visio. Let's look at what the process looks like as a flowchart. First, we have to identify the entitlement of the case as well as the priority. Then, the entitlement and priority will determine how the case is handled. If the priority is high and the entitlement is premier, then that case should be routed to an escalation resource. Else, if the entitlement is premier or professional, then it should go to a regular resource. Otherwise, simply direct it to a web resource. Now the next part of this process is that the engineer get in contact with the customer and meet the SLA. For our premier and professional entitlements, the engineer should be doing so with a phone call. For other customers, the web resource should be sending out an SLA email. This type of branching is incorrect. All branches must merge at a single stage. So we could do a couple things here. We could simply merge the events to a single SLA contact stage. However, this doesn't allow us to specifically choose to create a phone call or email as the requirements suggest. What we need to do is duplicate a little effort for both the escalation resource and the regular resource stages. Now that we have our branch here, we could simply end the process as it is. Peer branches must all either merge or each end the process, but not both. However, our business scenarios suggest we continue building out the process. Once the SLA phone call or SLA email stage has been completed, we must complete the SLA status. We have a branch that needs to be merged to a single stage. After the SLA has been met, the engineer must research the issue. During the course of researching the issue, the engineer could determine that the case requires escalation. If the case requires escalation, then we need to make sure that that case gets assigned to an escalation resource. If the engineer is able to resolve the case without needing an escalation, then the case is simply resolved. At this point, we have a branch stage that once an escalation resource has been assigned, they continue working on the case to resolution. This has been the design stage of the business process. We must now do this within Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015. Now that we're in Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015, let's go ahead and create our business process flow for the case handling scenario. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on Microsoft Dynamics CRM and Settings. I'll click on Settings and I'll scroll to the right here and click on Processes. And on Processes, I'm going to go ahead and click on New. Here I'm going to go ahead and define this for my case handling process. As you can see here, the process name is Case Handling, the category is Business Process Flow, and the entity is Case. I'll go ahead and click on OK. And this takes me to the Business Process Flow editor. So now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and refer back to my Visio diagram. Again, I want to keep an eye on my business process flow and ensure that I'm following it to the scenario. As you can see, my first step in this Visio diagram is the Identify stage. So that's the stage I'm going to go ahead and create now. So now that we're back in CRM, go ahead and put my stage name to Identify. And at this point, I need to utilize the priority, the entitlement, and the subject. Now, I said I needed to define the priority, entitlement, and subject. Realistically, I only need to define the priority and entitlement. Again, the requirement is that if I'm going to build conditional expressions, so these if conditions, or I'm going to build these branches, the branch conditions must contain information from the previous step. So let's look back at my Visio diagram. In the Visio diagram, I can see that my condition is if priority equals high and entitlement is premier, then do something. So I need to make sure that whatever's in my if condition is on the stage prior to the branch. So again, let's look at the branches if priority equals high and entitlement is premier. So let's go ahead and build that in CRM 2015. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on just add a branch. Here it's asking my if condition expression. So if priority equals high, and, so I need to define an and. To do that, I can just click on this button, which adds a condition. And entitlement equals, well, here you can see that entitlement is actually a lookup. So if I choose a record within the lookup, it's going to look only for that particular record. However, what I can do is I can change this operator to contains. So that means that if the primary field name for entitlement, if that contains a word like premier, then it's going to go ahead and meet this condition. So I have this first part of my branch defined. Now let's look at the Visio diagram and see what we can do next. In the Visio diagram, I could continue down and set these particular stages. However, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and build the rest of my condition expressions here. So I'm going to go ahead and add another branch. Again, I'm branching off of the identify stage. To do that, I'm just going to click on add a branch again. And here you can see that this else statement popped up. So if priority equals high and entitlement contains premier, do this, else do this other thing. Well, that's not exactly what we need. We need an else if statement. To do that, we just simply click on it and it brings us the if conditions. So at this point, we need to say if entitlement contains premier or if entitlement contains professional, then we're into our stage. So now that I have those defined, I just wanted to point out one little thing. Again, we're utilizing the same thing as we would use for business rules logic. So if you've seen the business rules logic training already, you would know that by adding a condition, you can only choose and or logical operators. You cannot choose a mix. So what happens if I add another condition, and this time I'm just going to go ahead and change this to an and. If you can see here, it changed my or to an and. Again, this is consistent with business rules logic. So you can only have ands or statements. I'm going to go ahead and delete this and clean this up. Okay, so now that I have that cleaned up again, I now have my if, else if, and I'm missing something. I'm missing what happens if these two conditions are not met, and that's my else statement. So now I have nothing that I need to define in my if conditions for the else. So if I look back at the Visio diagram, you can see that I have this if, and else conditions already set. Now it's a matter of setting my stages. So if the priority equals high and entitlement is premier, I'm going to go ahead and set my stage for Escalation Resource and SLA phone call. So let's go ahead and do that now. So under my if priority equals high and entitlement contains premier, I'm going to go ahead and click on add insert a stage. Here's where we defined that we need Escalation Resource. And I wanted to show you that if I'm typing it in, you can see that I can select a value. And when I select that, the name of that field is actually going to populate in the step name. In this case, owner doesn't really make any sense. I'm going to go ahead and change this. I can actually change that to whatever I want. So you can see that I've changed this now to assign to an escalation engineer. That completes this stage. I'm going to go ahead and move on to my phone call stage. To do that, again, I'm just going to go ahead and click on Insert Stage. I set the name. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the entity type, because of what I've been working on before is case entity. I need to go ahead and change this to phone call. Now again, we do not have to define a relationship. If I don't define a relationship, nothing bad is going to happen. A record will get created, and I just have to manually set everything. However, if I want things to flow properly with attribute mappings, I would want to select a relationship. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can see I get a list of the previous stages and the entities that have a relationship with the phone call entity. In this case, we have the case entity, and the relationship for a phone call is regarding. So I'm going to go ahead and define that. Now I'm going to go ahead and just fill out the rest of these steps. So now that I have both of these stages created, I have my Escalation Resource stage and my SLA phone call stage. Let's take a look back at the Visio diagram. Within the Visio diagram, we can see that we've finished up with this condition. So if it's this, then do these things. Now I need to go ahead and work on my else if. So else if is going to be a regular resource and a phone call. So let's go ahead and pop in back into CRM and do that. I'm at my else if condition, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Insert Stage. And I'm going to go ahead and create these two stages real quick. Okay, now I have my else if statement, and under there I have my two stages. Now I need to go back to my Visio diagram, take a look at that, what's the else information. So here we can see that our else is identify, use a web resource, and create an SLA email. So let's go ahead and pop back over to CRM and do that real quick. So under my else condition, I'll go ahead and click on Insert Stage. And I'll go ahead and set these up. So now under my else statement, I have my two stages created. So now let's go back to Visio and see what's next. Within Visio, we can see that I have my last stages of my branch. I need to merge, as mentioned before, every branch needs a merge relationship or it needs to end. So I could end it here, but I'm not going to, right? I need to merge it to SLA status. So let's go back to CRM to see how we merge it to SLA status. To merge it to a branch, what we'll need to do is we'll need to go back up to where our initial stage is before the branch. The insert stage has actually changed to insert stage after branch. So that's exactly what we're doing. That SLA status is after the branch. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And now I'll go ahead and scroll all the way down to the bottom. And then you can see I have a new stage. So I'm going to go ahead and define this real quick. Now that I've finished writing up the SLA status stage, I did make a mistake. The current order of the steps doesn't really make sense for my users. What I want to do is make sure that sent was at the top. To do that, I simply select a step, and these icons on the bottom here, so that we could either move it up or move it down. If I move it down, it moves it down, and I want to move it up all the way to the top. Okay, so now we have our SLA status. Let's jump back to Visio and see what our next step is. Visio shows us that we have a research stage. So let's go ahead and create that real quick. Again, I'm going to go ahead and insert a stage after the SLA status. This stage is research. Now I have my research stage set. Let's go ahead and jump back to Visio and see what the next step is. Visio shows us that we have a decision to make. Does the case need escalation? Let's go back to CRM. In CRM, you can see on the research stage, I have this require escalation, and I have the is escalated field set on that stage. So again, I'm going to go ahead and add a branch because I want something to happen if is escalated is set to true. So if is escalated equals true or yes, then I want to insert a stage. Okay, now that I have my escalation required stage set, let's jump back to Visio real quick. And here I can see that I have my is escalation required needed, and that's yes. So I have escalation required done. The last thing I need to do is actually merge this step and merge this one, the research and the escalation required for a resolution stage. So let's go ahead and do that in CRM. Again, I need to go ahead and merge these two branches. To do that, I simply click on the insert stage after branch. And here's where I'll go ahead and set my resolution stage. So now I've completed the resolution stage. There's other things we could have gone through with the editor, but this is simply showing the changes between CRM 2013 and CRM 2015. What I'll go ahead and do is I want to go ahead and save and activate this stage, and I want to take a look at this within the application itself. So I'll go ahead and scroll all the way to the top. I'll click on Save, and I'll click on Activate. So there's one thing that I do want to note, that after it's activated, the business process flow can actually be modified while it's active. So here you can see I can make a change to the stage category and set it to qualify. I can save that, and it's actually going to publish it in real time. So there's no need to deactivate, modify the process, and then activate it again, just like workflows. We can actually do this in real time. Now this obviously has its advantages and disadvantages, but I just wanted to point it out. So let's go ahead and CRM and take a look at what this business process flow looks like. So what we need to do now is go ahead and go into the case entity to take a look at our case handling process. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and Microsoft Dynamics CRM and Service. I'll click on Service and Cases, and I'm going to go ahead and open up one of these existing cases. Now that this case is open, you can actually see that the business process flow is set to Identify, Research, Resolve, and this happens to be the out-of-the-box business process flow. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and change it to the business process flow that we created. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on the More Commands or the ellipsis button here and go to Switch Process. Once I have the Switch Process dialog open, I'm going to go ahead and click on Case Handling, that's the one we created, and click on Select. Now you can see that we have the business process open for the business process that we just created. We have the Identify, Web Resource, SLA Email, SLA Status, Research, and Resolution. Let's go ahead and open up the Visio diagram and take a look at what path this is leading us down. So here I can see where they identify, then the web resource, SLA email, SLA status, research, and then resolution. It skipped these two because the case did not meet any of these conditions. So let's go ahead and modify the case so it meets this condition of if the priority is equal to high and entitlement is premier. I'm back into CRM, and now I'll go ahead and modify this. So if the entitlement was premier and the priority is high, so once I select that to Premier, you could actually see that it actually changed this from a web resource to regular resource. And now if I change this to high, it actually changed it to an escalation resource and then also changed that to an SLA phone call. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and continue down this business process flow just to see how things happen. So now I can see that in this Visio diagram that I've now gone from identify into escalation resource. I'll complete the SLA phone call, SLA status, and get to research. I'll complete all those steps and get to the research. So what you can see here is now that I'm on the escalation resource stage, I want to go ahead and progress to the next stage, which is our SLA phone call. So I'll click on next stage, and you can see that it's asking us to select a phone call. Now I could have had very rich business logic. I had a synchronous workflow that triggered and created a phone call record automatically, and then I could have selected that phone call. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a phone call on the fly. I'll just go ahead and click on this create button. And now I just need to go ahead and fill out the required fields here. So now that I've got this phone call record created, I'm going to go ahead and save it. All right, now the phone call stage has been completed. So I'll go ahead and click on the next stage, which will get us to our SLA status. I'll go ahead and if we had things that were required, it wouldn't allow me to click on next stage, and that's called stage gating. So I'm going to actually go ahead and click on the next stage and get to the research stage. Now, if I look back at the Visio diagram, from the research stage you can see that we have a decision to make. Does the case need escalation? Well, if you remember back in how we were defining this business process flow, if require escalation was yes or true, then it was going to create a new stage for our escalation resource. So I'm going to go ahead and check on require escalation and set that to yes. Now you can see that we added an additional stage called Escalation Required. So now I've successfully created a new stage. I'll go ahead and go to the Escalation Required stage and click on Resolution. So here you can actually see that we followed through this whole path. We started with Identify, and we first started with the web resource, SLA email, and went down that path. However, by making some changes within the form, we were able to actually make the business process flow change on the fly. We changed the priority was to high, and we added a premier entitlement, and that led us down this escalation resource. Once we got to the research stage, we then selected is escalated or requires escalation true, and that actually sent us down to this path, and then everything led to the resolution stage. That gives you a real idea of how powerful business process flows can be now. Now that we've seen the new branching capabilities, there are a few limitations to note. First, a branch can only go 5 levels deep. The UI will still show the Add Branch button, but clicking on it will not add another branch. The conditional statements if, else if can only use fields defined in the previous stage. Even though the editor shows all of the fields as being available, the field within the condition statement is required. If a field being used in a condition that is not defined in the previous stage, you get an error icon next to the problematic statement upon saving the business process. Just like with business rules logic, conditions cannot use a mix of and or logical operators. When defining the second and or statement and flipping the operator to the opposite operator, the editor will cause all and or operators to change to the one that was just defined. Lastly, business process flows cannot loop through the business process flow. We're going to take a quick look at some additional architecture of business process flows. This information goes deeper than most need to know, so if you don't care to understand the underworkings of business process flows, feel free to skip this section. With the updated business process flow abilities, a new field is used on each entity that is enabled for business process flows to track all of the completed stages for the currently active business process. It also includes the currently active stage. The new field is Traversed Path. Let's take a quick look at how we can relate the data from these tables. As we can see, this case average order shipment time sample has completed 3 stages and has 1 active stage. Running the following queries give me the necessary information to determine what the stage path is for the case. This is how CRM keeps track of which stage a record is on. Now, changing between processes changes the traversed path. Once you change a process, coming back to the original process will start that path over again. With Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015, there is a client-side object you can use to interact with business process flows in your scripts. We'll now take a look at the new SDK functionality around business process flows. Here's a view of the object model for business process flows and the collection and objects that make it up. At the top, we have the business process flow object. This object has a process name, process ID, and the render state, which is either visible or hidden. Within the business process flow, we have a collection of stages. A stage object contains the stage name, the stage ID, the entity that is based off of, and the status of active or inactive. Within this stage, we have a collection of steps. A step contains the step name as well as the field names, and finally, if it is required or not. So what is possible with the Client API for business processes? The XRM page.data namespace has been extended to include methods under xrm.page.data.process. The xrm.page.ui namespace has been extended to include methods under xrm.page.ui.process. The xrm.page.data.process namespace provides events, methods, and objects to interact with the business process flow data in a form. The xrm.page.ui.process namespace provides methods to interact with the business process flow control in a form. With these new methods, what can be done? As you can see, as a developer, you can obtain and update the current state of the business process flow. You can even change which business process flow is active. Additionally, you can change a stage and make that the current stage. You can change the visibility of the business process flow by either showing, removing, expanding, or collapsing it completely from a form. Finally, these new methods can add or remove event handlers of the business process flow control. Let's look into the list of available XRM page.data.process methods. Again, these methods are how a developer can hook into the data of a business process flow. Use getActiveProcess to retrieve information about the active process, and setActiveProcess to set a different process as the active process. Use getActiveStage to retrieve information about the active stage, and setActiveStage to set a different stage as the active stage. Use getActivePath method to get a collection of stages with methods to interact with the stages displayed in the business process flow control. Use the getEnabledProcesses method to asynchronously retrieve the enabled business process flows that the user can use for an entity. We even have methods to manage event handlers. Use the add-on-stage-change, remove-on-stage-change, add-on-stage-selected, and remove-on-stage-selected methods to add or remove event handlers for the business process flow control. The navigation methods are move next to move to the next stage, and move previous to move to the previous stage. A process contains the data for a business process flow. A stage contains the data for a stage in a business process flow. A step contains the data for a step within a stage in business process flow. So we've seen what we can do with the data side of business processes. What can be done with the controls? setDisplayState is a method to expand or collapse the business process control. setVisible is the process to show or hide the business process controls. More information about all of these methods and sample code can be found within the SDK. In order to showcase the functionality a bit here, let's walk through a scenario and see how we can use Business Process Flow Client API to really help us achieve that goal. The scenario is taking the case Business Process Flow a little bit further. With the case handling business process flow, I want the escalation resources to go through a series of different processes before they are able to continue with the case handling. I'm going to accomplish this by using a second business process flow called escalation process. The first thing we need to do is take a deeper look into some of the options we have available to us. Let's go ahead and go back into Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015 and take a look at this. Okay, while you were away, what I did was I went ahead and created a new process called escalation process. Here I can see if I went back into Microsoft Dynamics CRM and settings and processes, and here you can see I have a new escalation process. I just wanted to take a look and show you what that looks like. So I have this a couple of stages: assign escalation engineer, notify escalation research, and a different various other stages here. So I've already went ahead and saved and activated that. And what I want to do is make sure that that's available to the case entity. So I'll go ahead and close that and go back into the Microsoft Dynamics CRM, service, and it takes me back to the cases entity. Now what I want to do is go back into the original case that we had open. So go back into here, and I can see that I have a status all the way back to resolution. At this point, I want to go ahead and change the process to this escalation process. And you can see that I have 3 process flows now. I have the original out of the box, and I have case handling and escalation process. I just want to go ahead and set the escalation process and see what that looks like. Okay, so now I see that I have the escalation process here up and running. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and start building things out here. So I saw a cool trick presented to me during this training, so I'm going to share it with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and open up a console session within the F12 tools for Internet Explorer. Now that I have the console frame open, I need to change the context of the console frame to utilize the case frame. To do that, I need to go ahead and set that within the console. You'll know that you're in the proper frame by the current window set to the main.aspx page. If it's set to something else, the IntelliSense for your console is not going to work, which means that your methods are not available. So the first thing we want to do, we want to go ahead and get the process ID for the escalation process. We already switched the process to escalation process. Now let's retrieve the current process ID. We can do that by using one of the methods for getActiveProcess, getID. So here I wanted just to quickly point out that if you were in the wrong context, if your console session was in the wrong context, your IntelliSense would not be showing up with this. So I'm going to continue on with the getActiveProcess. Okay, this just gave us the ActiveProcess ID for escalation process. So I'm going to go ahead and file that away. Just going to keep an eye on that for future reference. The next thing I want to do is to determine if the current active stage is escalation required. If so, then I want to be sure that we change the process so we are within the escalation process. Let's first ensure that we have the proper syntax for that. I'm first going to change the process back to the case handling process so that I can get this escalation required stage. I'm going to go ahead and click through each of these stages to progress the business process flow. Now that I'm on the escalation required stage, I want to make sure that my syntax is correct for getting the stage name. What we did here is verify that the syntax was correct and verify that the name is correct. I'm going to utilize both of those within my future web resource. Okay, now I have some of the syntax I'm going to use for my logic. Now I need to understand how to change the process. To set an active process is pretty simple. We simply need to call the following method and pass in the process ID as well as a callback function. Here's what I need the process ID for escalation process. We'll go ahead and copy the process ID and put it within the setActiveProcess method. Now, part of the setActiveProcess method is that it needs a callback function. I really don't care if it does anything. I could show it as an alert or something like that. But again, I don't really care. I just want it to just change the process. You can see that the syntax that I utilize within this XRM page process setActiveProcess is working properly. You can see that it actually changed from the case handling process to the escalation process. At this point, I really have all that I need in order to get this going. I'm going to go ahead and create a web resource that's registered on the onload event so that on a stage change, it's going to look for the stage name. And if the stage name is escalation required, it's going to change the process to the escalation process. So let's go ahead and create a web resource by going to Microsoft Dynamics CRM and Settings, Customizations, and Customize the System. So I'm actually going to go ahead and go into the case entity and onto the form. Within the form, I'm going to go ahead and click on Form Properties, and I'm going to add a new library. At this point, I don't have one created, so I'll just go ahead and create a new one. I'm just going to go ahead and keep the naming convention simple. I'm going to set this name to the escalatebpf.js. My type is going to be JavaScript. and I'm just going to go ahead and go to the text editor. I need the function that I'm going to define for my onload event. And the reason I need this function on the onload event is so that it's listening on the stage change. So now that I've added this add-on stage change, I'm going to call in the handler. I'm just going to, for the sake of argument, I'm just going to go ahead and change this to escalation business process flow. Okay, now that that's defined, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create the escalation business process flow, which is going to handle the logic for when it's on the stage change. It's going to do the validation of the active process, validate that it's the case handling process. If it's the case handling process, check to see if the stage name, the active stage name, is escalation required, and if so, change the active process to escalation process. So now we have defined the rest of our code here. So I have my function of escalation business process flow. Within there, I have a variable that's shorthanding the process, the xrm.page.data.process, because I'm going to utilize it quite a bit. And then again, I'm just trying to verify that if the process, the active process, is case handling, then we want to validate the get active stage name is escalation required. If it is, then we want to make sure that we change the active process to be the escalation process with a callback, with an empty callback function. So let's go ahead and save this and publish the changes. And then let's go ahead and close our default solution. Let's go back into the case entity. At this point, I don't need my console session, so I'm just going to hit F12 and close it out. We'll go ahead and go back into the same case that we've been working on. And let's go ahead and change the business process flow back to the case handling one. So let's go ahead and click through each one of these stages. So now that I'm on the research stage, I can see that require escalation is set to yes, and escalation required stage is enabled. So now I should expect that by clicking on next stage should take me to the escalation process. So you can see that by changing that active stage to be the escalation required sent us to this particular process. So this is not just limited to processes. I can have form interactions, or I could even hide the business process flow window. It's very rich, and you can actually get a lot of functionality through the business process flow API. Thanks again for taking the time to learn about the enhanced business process flows within Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2015. Please take some time and complete the associated lab to familiarize yourself with this feature in more detail.